Be-ers and Doers by Budge Wilson. Mom was a little narrow wisp of a woman. You wouldn't have thought, to look at her, that she could move a card table. Even for me, it was sometimes hard to believe the ease with which she could shove around an entire family. Often I tried to explain her to myself. She had been brought up on the south shore of Nova Scotia. I wondered sometimes if the scenery down there had rubbed off on her. All those granite rocks and fogs and screeching gulls, the slow, laboring springs and the quick, grudging summers. Then the winters, grayer than doom and endless. I was the oldest. I was around that house for 5 years before Maudie came along. They were peaceful, those 5 years, and even now it's easy to remember how everything seemed calm and simple. But now I know why. I was a conformist and malleable as early as 3 years old. I didn't buck the system. If Mom said, "Hurry, Adelaide," I hurried. If she said to me at 5, "Fold that laundry now, Addie, and don't let no grass grow under your feet," I folded it fast. So there were very few battles at first, and no major wars. Dad, now, he was peaceful just by nature. If a tornado had come whirling in the front door and lifted the roof clear off its hinges, he probably would have just scratched the back of his neck and said with a slow surprise, "Well, oh, just think of that." He'd been born in the Annapolis Valley, where the hills are round and gentle and the summer sunlit very warm. "Look at your father," Mom would say to us later. "He thinks that all he's got to do is be. Well, being ain't good enough. You got to do too. Me? I'm a doer." All the time she was talking, she'd be knitting up a storm or mixing dough or pushing a mop, hands forever and ever on the move. Although Mom was fond of pointing out to us the things our father didn't do, he must have been doing something. Our farm was in the most fertile part of the valley, and it's true that we had that kind of soil that seemed to make things grow all of their own accord. Those beets and carrots and potatoes just came pushing up into the sunshine with an effortless grace, and they kept us well fed, with plenty left over to sell. But there was weeding and harvesting to do, and all those 10 cows to milk, not to mention the 30 apple trees in our orchard to be cared for. I think maybe he just did his work so slowly and quietly that she found it hard to believe he was doing anything at all. Besides, on the South Shore, nothing ever grew without a struggle. And when Dad was through all his chores, or in between times, he liked to just sit on our old porch swing and watch the spring unfold or the summer blossom. And in the fall, he sat there smiling, admiring the rows of vegetables, giant sunflowers, the golden leaves gathering in the trees of North Mountain. Maudie wasn't Maudie for the reasons of persons called Ginny or Gertie or Susie. She wasn't called Maudie because she was cute. She got that name because if you got a terrible name like Maud, you have to do something to rescue it. She was called after Mom's Aunt Maud, who was a miser and had the whole bank in Nova Scotia under her mattress. But she was a crabby old thing who just sat around, living on her dead husband's stocks and bonds. A beer, not a doer. Mom really scorned Aunt Maud and hated her name, but she had high hopes that our family would sometimes cash in on that gold mine under the mattress. She hadn't counted on Aunt Maud going to Florida one winter and leaving her house in care of a dear old friend. The dear old friend emptied the contents of the mattress, located Aunt Maud's 3 diamond rings, and took off for Mexico, leaving the pipes to freeze and the cat to die of starvation. After that, old Maud couldn't have cared less if everybody in the whole district had been named after her. She was that bitter. Maudie was so much like Mom that it was just as if she'd been cut out with a cookie cutter of the same dough. Raced around at top speed all through her growing up times, full of projects and sports and hobbies and gossip and nerves, and mad at everyone who sang a different tune. But this story is not about Maudie. I guess you could say it's mostly about Albert. Albert was the baby. I was 8 years old when he was born, and I often felt like he was my own child. He was special to all of us, I guess, except maybe to Maudie. And when Mom saw him for the first time, I watched a slow, soft tenderness in her face. That was a rare thing for any of us to see. It was okay because I was cooperative and I knew she loved me. Maudie was her clone and almost like a piece of herself, so they admired one another, although they were too similar to be at peace for very long. But Albert was something different. Right away, I knew she was going to pour into Albert something that didn't reach the rest of us, except in part. As time went on, this scared me. I could see that she'd made up her mind that Albert was going to be the perfect son. That meant, among other things, that he was going to be a fast moving doer. And even when he was 3 or 4, it wasn't hard for me to know that this wasn't going to be easy because Albert was a beer born that way. As the years went by, people around Wilmot used to say, just look at that family of Hortons. Mrs. Horton made one child, Maudie, and there's Adelaide, who's her own self. But Albert now, Mr. Horton made him all by himself. They're alike as two pine needles. And just as nice, I could have added, but Mom wasn't either pleased or amused. You're a bad influence on that boy, Stanley, she'd say to my dad. How's he going to get any ambition if all he sees in a father who can spend up an hour leaning on his hoe, staring at the mountain? Mom had it all worked out that Albert was going to be a lawyer, or a doctor, or a member of parliament. My dad didn't argue with her, or, at least, not in an angry way. Oh, come on now, Dorothy, he might say to her real slow. The vegetables are coming along just fine. No need to shove them more than necessary. It does a man good to look at them hills. You want to try it sometime? They tell you things. Nothing I need to hear, she'd huff, and then disappear into the house, clattering pans, thumping the mop, scraping the kitchen table across the floor to get more dust. And Albert would just watch it all, saying not a word, chewing on a piece of grass. Mom really loved my dad, even though he drove her nearly crazy. Lots more went on than just nagging and complaining. If you looked really hard, you could see that. If it hadn't have been for Albert wanting him to be a 4-star son, she mightn't have bothered to make Dad look so useless. Even so, when they sat on the swing together at night, you could feel their closeness. They didn't hold hands or anything. Her hands were always too busy embroidering, crocheting, mending something, or just swatting mosquitoes. But they liked to be together. Personal chemistry, I thought as I grew older, is a mysterious and contrary thing. One day, Albert brought his report card home from school, and Mom looked at it hard and anxious. Eyebrows nodded. Albert seems like a nice child, she read aloud to us all, more loudly than necessary, but his marks could be better. He spends too much time looking out the window dreaming. She paused. No one spoke. Leaning on his hoe, continued Mom testily. Albert, she snapped, you pull up your socks by Easter or you're going to be in deep trouble. Dad stirred uneasily in his chair. Ah, Dorothy, he mumbled, leave him be. He's a good kid. Or could be. Maybe, she threw back at him. What he seems like to me is rock bottom lazy. Sure, he's slow moving. Could be he's slow in his head, too. Dumb. Albert's eyes flickered at the word, but that's all. He just stood there and watched, eyes level. But I love him a lot, continued Mom, and unlike you, I don't plan to just sit around and watch him grow dumber. If it's the last thing I do, I'm going to light a fire under his feet. Albert was 12 then, and the nagging began to accelerate in earnest. How come you got low marks on your math test? I don't like math. Seems like my head don't want it. But do you work at it? Well, no, not much. Can't see no sense in working hard at something I'll never use. I can add up our grocery bill. I passed, that's enough. Not for me, it ain't, she'd storm back at him. No baseball practice till you had that until you get them sums perfect. Ask Maudie to check 'em. Maudie used to drum that arithmetic into him night after night. She loved playing school teacher. That's how she eventually ended up. And a cross one. One thing Albert was good at, though, was English class. By the time he got to high school, he spent most of his time reading as he did staring into space. His way of speaking changed. He stopped dropping his G's, and he said isn't instead of ain't. His tenses were all neated up. He wasn't putting on airs. I just think that all those people in his book started being more real to him than his neighbors. He loved animals too. He made friends with the calves and even the cows. Mutt and Jeff, our two gray cats, slept on his bed every night. Often you'd see him out in the fields talking to our dogs while he was working. Always messing around with animals, complained Mom. Sometimes I think he's 3 parts woman and 1 part child. He's 15 years old, and last week I caught him bawling in the hayloft after we had to shoot that male calf. Couldn't understand why he can't go on feeding an animal that'll never produce milk. Nothing wrong with liking animals, I argued. I was home for the weekend from my secretarial job in Wolfville. Talking to dogs and crying over cattle is not what I'd call a shortcut to success. And the cats spend so much time with him, they've forgotten why we brought him into the house in the first place. For mice. Maybe there's more to life than success or mice, I said. I was 23 now and more interested in Albert than in conformity. Mom made a sound through her nose. Adelaide Horton, she'd say, when you're my age, you'll understand more about a success in mice than you do now, or the lack of them. She turned on her heels and went back into the house. And if you can't see, she said through the screen door, why I don't want Albert to end up exactly like your father, then you've got even less sense than I thought you had. I don't want any son of mine going through life just satisfied to be. Then I could hear her banging around in the house. I looked off the veranda out the front field where Dad and Albert were raking up hay for the cattle. Slowly, with lots of pauses for talk. All of a sudden they stopped, and Albert pointed up to the sky. It was fall, and 4 long wedges of geese were flying far above us, casting down their strange muffled cry. The sky was cornflower blue, and the wind was sending white clouds scuttling across it. My breath was caught with the beauty of it all, and as I looked at Dad and Albert, they threw away their rakes and lay down flat on their backs, right there in the front pasture, in order to drink in the sky. And after all the geese had passed over, they stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes more. We were all home for Christmas the year Albert turned 18. Maudie was having a Christmas break from teaching, and she was looking skinnier and more tight-lipped than I remember her. I was there with my husband and my new baby. Jennifer and Albert was even quieter than usual. But content, I thought, not making any waves. Mom had intensified her big campaign to have him go to Acadia University in the fall. Pre-law, she said, or maybe teacher training. Anyways, you gotta go. A man has to be successful. She avoided my father's eyes. In the fall, she said, for sure. It's Christmas, Dad said without anger. Let's just be happy and forget all them plans for a few days. He was sitting at the kitchen table, breaking up the bread slowly, for the turkey stuffing. He chuckled. I've decided to be a doer this Christmas. And if the doing's being done at that speed, she said, taking the bowls from him, we'll be eating Christmas dinner on New Year's Day. She started to break up the bread so quickly that you could hardly focus on her fingers flying. Christmas came and went. It was a pleasant time. The food was good. Jennifer slept through the dinner and didn't cry at all. We listened to the Queen's Christmas message. We opened presents. Dad gave Mom a ring with a tiny sapphire in it, although she'd asked for a new vacuum cleaner. I like this better, she said, and looked as though she might cry. We'll get the vacuum cleaner in January, he said. That's no kind of gift to get for Christmas. It's a work thing. She looked as if she might say something, but didn't. It was on December 26th that it happened. That was the day of the fire. It was a lazy day. We all got up late except me, of course, who had to feed the baby at 2 and at 6. But when we were all up, we just sort of lazed around in our dressing gowns, drinking coffee, admiring one another's presents, talking about old times, singing a carol or two around the old organ. Dad had that look on him that he used to get when all his children were in his house at the same time, like he was in temporary possession of the best life had to offer. Even Mom was softened up. She sat by the grate fire and talked a bit, although there was still a lot of jumping up and down and rushing out to the kitchen to check on the stove or cut up the vegetables. Me, I think that on the day after Christmas, you should just eat up leftovers and enjoy a slow state of collapse. But you can't blame a person for feeding you. It's handy to have Martha or two around a house that's already been equipped with three Marys. Albert was the best one to watch, though. To me, anyway. He was just sitting on the floor in his striped pajamas, holding Jennifer, rocking her, and singing songs to her in a low, crooning voice. Tender, I thought. The way I like a man to be. Albert had just put the baby back in her carriage when a giant spark flew out of the fireplace, hit the old nylon carpet like an incendiary bomb, and the rug burst into flames. Mom started waving an old Afghan over it as though she was blowing out a match, but all she was doing was fanning the fire. While most of us stood there in immovable fear, Albert had already grabbed Jennifer, carriage and all, and had rushed out to the barn with her. He was back in a flash, just in time to see Maudie's dressing gown catch fire. He pushed her down on the floor and lay on top of her to smother the flames. And then he was up on his feet again, taking charge. "Those 4 buckets in the summer kitchen," he started yelling. "Start filling them up." He pointed to Mom and Dad, who obeyed him like he was a general, and they were privates. To my husband, he roared, "Get out to the barn and keep that baby warm. And you," he pointed at me, "call the fire department. It's 825-3131." In the meantime, the smoke was starting to fill up the room. We were all coughing. Little spits of fire were crawling up the curtains, and Maudie was just standing there shrieking. Before Mom and Dad got back with the water, Albert was out in the back bedroom hauling up the carpet, racing in with it over his shoulder, and he bellowed, "Get out of the way!" And we all moved. Then he slapped the carpet over the flames on the floor, and the fire just died without so much as a protest. Next, he grabbed one of the big cushions off the sofa and chased after the little lapping flames on the curtains and chairs and table runners, smothering them. When Mom and Dad appeared with buckets in each hand, he shouted, "Stop! Don't use that stuff! No need to have water damage, too!" Then Albert was suddenly still, hands hanging at his sides with his fingers spread. He smiled shyly. "It's out," he said. I rushed up and I hugged him, wailing like a baby, loving him and thanking him for protecting Jennifer from smoke, from fire, from cold, from heaven knows what. Everyone opened windows and doors, and before long, even the smoke was gone. It smelled pretty awful, but no one cared. When we all gathered again in the parlor to clear up the mess, and Jennifer was back in my bedroom asleep, Mom stood up and looked at Albert, her eyes ablaze with admiration and with something else I couldn't put my finger on. "Albert," she breathed, "we all thank you. You've saved the house, the baby, all of us, even our Christmas presents. I'm proud, proud, proud of you." Albert just stood there smiling quietly but very pale. His hands were getting red and sort of puckered looking. Mom took a deep breath. "And that," she went on, "is what I've been looking for all your life. Some sort of sign you were 100% alive. And now we all know you are. Maybe even a lick more alive than the rest of us. So," she folded her arms and her eyes bored into him, "I'll have no more excuses from you now. No one can put out a house fire single-handed and rescue a niece and a sister and organize us all into a fire brigade. He's going to sit around for the rest of his life gathering dust. No siree, or leaning against no hole. Why, you even had the fire department number tucked away in your head. Just imagine what you're going to be able to do with them kind of brains. I'll never, never rest until I see you educated and successful, doing what you was meant to do. I'm just proud of you, Albert. So terrible proud." Members of the fire department were starting to arrive at the front door, but Albert ignored them. He was white now like death, and he made a low, terrible sound. He didn't exactly pull his lips back from his teeth and growl, but the result was similar. It was like the sound of a dog before he leaps from a throat, and what he said was, "You just leave me be, woman." We never heard words like this come out of Albert, and the parlor was as still as night as we all listened. "You ain't proud of me, Mom," he whispered, all his beautiful grammar gone. "You're just proud of what you want me to be, and I got some news for you. Things I should have told you years gone by. I ain't gonna be what you want." His voice was starting to quaver now, and he was trembling all over. "I'm gonna be me. And it seems like if that's ever gonna happen, I'll have to be in some other place, and I plan to do something about it before the day is out." Then he shut his eyes and fainted right there down under the charred carpet. The firemen carted him off to the hospital where he was treated for shock and second-degree burns. He was there for 3 weeks. My dad died of a stroke when he was 66. Not enough exercise, said Mom, after she'd got over the worst part of her grief. Too much sitting around and watching the lilacs grow. No way for his blood to circulate good. Me? I asked myself if he just piled up his silent tensions until he burst wide open. Maybe he wasn't all that calm and peaceful after all. Could be he was just waiting, like Albert, for the moment when it would all come pouring out. Perhaps that wasn't the way it was, but all the same, I wonder. Mom's still growing strong at 88. Unlike Dad's, her blood must circulate like a racing stream. With all that rushing around, she continues to move as if she's being chased. She's still knitting and preserving and scrubbing and mending and preaching. She'll never get one of those tension diseases like angina or cancer or even arthritis because she doesn't keep one single thing bottled up inside her for more than 5 minutes. Out it all comes like the air of a flat tire, either a hiss or a bang. Perhaps it wasn't growing up on the South Shore that made Mom the way she is. I lived on that coast now, and I've learned that it's more than just gray and stormy. I know about the long sandy beaches and the peace that comes on a clear horizon. I've seen the razzle-dazzle color of the low-lying scarlet bushes in the fall, blazing against the black of the spruce tree and the bluest sky in the world. I'm familiar with the way one single radiant summer day can make you forget a whole fortnight of fog, like birth after a long labor. You might say that the breakers out on the reef are angry or full of threats. To me, though, those waves are just leaping and dancing, wild with freedom and joyfulness. But I think Mom was in a hurry from the moment she was born. I doubt if she ever stopped long enough to take notice of things like that. Albert left home as soon as he got out of the hospital. He worked as a stevedore in Halifax for a number of years, and when he got enough money saved, he bought a little run-down house close to Digby, with a view of the Bay of Fundy. He's got a small chunk of land that's so black and rich, it doesn't take any pushing at all to make the flowers and the vegetables grow. He has a cow and a beagle and 4 cats and about 500 books. He fixes lawnmowers and boat engines for people in his area. He putters away at his funny little house. He writes pieces for the Dingy Courier and the Nova Scotian, and last winter he confessed to me that he writes poetry. He's childless and wifeless, but he has the time of day for any kid who comes around to hear stories or to have a broken toy fixed. He keeps an old rocker out on the edge of the cliff where he can sit and watch the tides of the Fundy rise and fall.